Welcome to my super type A attempt at being Zen, the podcast. My name is Risha Yorke, and I will be your host. If you are overworked, overtired, overstretched, overwhelmed, and just over it, you are in the right place. We like to say we are currently working towards Zen-ish. I'm thrilled that you've joined us. Let's see who will be supporting us on our path to Zen today. Our first interview is with Lauren Miller. I looked up Lauren online. I was Googling the term recovering perfectionist because somehow I thought I was a genius and came up with it. No, not true. And so I find Lauren and I'm reading her blog and I was like, okay, I have to talk to Lauren. So we had a nice chat and here she is today. So I'll give her a chance to introduce herself now.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here and super pumped to just chat about something that is so near and dear to my heart. So I am 26 years old. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I recently graduated from Dalhousie Medical School, and right now I'm a first year resident in psychiatry, which kind of goes along with all the sorts of things that we're going to talk about, and that's not a coincidence, I don't think. And yeah, just super excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us and thank you for being my first guest. This is so exciting for me. When we talked about doing this, I was sort of feeling the waters and calling people, and I was so excited and inspired by how into it you were right out of the gates. And so you told a bit about your story, but I'd love it if you could tell us, when did you realize that you were type A or a recovering perfectionist, as you put it, and what challenges has that presented?
Yeah, so it's one of those things I think that you, in hindsight, you're like, I don't think everybody was the way that I was. And particularly with people who are more type A and more perfectionistic, that lends itself to high productivity and achievement and doing well in a lot of areas. So you don't really think about it at all, really, because things are going well. I would say it wasn't until I got to university that I realized that it was maybe a bit problematic. And it's one of those things too where it's hard because on the one hand, like, yes, it is problematic and causes a lot of psychological distress. And at the same time, it is in and of itself probably a good chunk of the reason of why I have been able to do the things and get to the places that I am. But
Yeah.
it was in medical school when I was surrounded by ultra type A. I was feeling type B for the first time in my life, and that's saying something. That I really started to kind of sit back and think about it and say, we're all so stressed, we are so high strung, and nobody thinks they're good enough, and we all feel less than and imposter syndrome, and there's just no way that that can be true. And and then I got kind of more into, honestly, Brene Brown, got down a rabbit hole about her, read
Yeah.
The Gifts of Imperfection, which really like changed a lot for me.
Yeah.
And that was when I realized, ah, there is another way. And it, like, I think I was good into my 20s before I started to give myself the permission to not be perfect. And it's just been a delight.
Isn't it a game changer?
Yes, it truly is.
But you're right. I mean, I think that happens to a lot of us, right? We're rewarded for being type A, and it is a skill. Like, it's a skill. I was thinking about it today because I'm running around picking up after people and getting things done. And I'm like, do they not realize it'd be way more efficient if they did it this way? And I thought to myself, no, they don't. They don't realize. So So that's your brain doing that,
Yes.
right? And sometimes it helps me, and sometimes it's not about being efficient,
Hmm.
right?
And like that was kind of a big light bulb moment for me when I realized like and some of these things I'm like when I realized, and by that I mean like when I read the work of somebody who has done a lot of work on this, that so much of perfectionism is not just like striving to be the best, it is running from the shame of failure. And when
Yeah.
I learned that, I was like,
Yeah.
I feel like I had been lying to myself for my whole life.
No, it's true, right? And just sort of digging into that. Like what's scary about failing? And where did that fear come from? Because I get it, through school we're inundated with you want straight A's and you don't want to fail that class, and failure's talked about in ways that it'll ruin your life. But frankly, like, I know people who failed out of school and they're doing great. So it's about finding the things, your strengths, right? It's finding your strengths and leaning into those, and then also being willing to fail so that you can become good at other things, because you're not going to be great at everything right away.
But wouldn't it just be so nice if we were?
I'm it's funny, I feel like I have this conversation a lot in my house. um my 6-year-old, he's good at a lot of things right away. And so, I totally see him as a mini me. I was like that too. I'm not great at it right away, what's the point? Right. And I was good at a lot of things. So I'm like, well, I have all these things I can do. Right. Why do I need to do the things I'm not good at? Well, because that's where the learning happens.
Yeah. And
Right.
it's I think there's a saying, or it's probably a quote, but something to the effect of what drives like true genuine learning is curiosity.
Yeah.
And to be curious, you need to acknowledge the fact that you don't know everything. And therefore, like, there are things that you need to learn, and there will be things that you don't know how to do, and there will be trial and error. And when they say it is so cheesy, it's like, oh, well, our failures are our greatest learning opportunities, but it is true.
Yeah.
If we can get out of our own way, like,
Yeah.
and take like the personal, like, oh God, like I'm a failure, and just look at it objectively and say, okay, what happened, like how can I do this differently? Of course I wasn't going to do it perfectly the first time. It was the first time.
Right.
Like, I'm here learning for a reason. Like, I am
Give yourself
literally
some
a
grace.
learner. you
Yeah, give
know
yourself some grace, allow yourself to make the mistakes. Yeah, 100%. I remember very clearly. Do you remember, like, the day or the year where you realized you didn't know everything?
I would say medical school, the beginning of medical school was quite the awakening. You go from like university, undergrad, oh, I have this test and I'm gonna memorize everything, and like I'm gonna do the exam and I'm gonna know exactly which ones I got wrong, and like the 2% that I lost, and I'll be okay with that. And then you get to medical school, and people really don't like to hear this, so like I apologize to all the people that have to now know that a pass in medical school is 65. But 65 has never been so hard to achieve, and there's just so much out there. And yeah, so and I had to get to a point also in medical school of I tried to prepare myself psychologically for the day that a failure came,
Yeah,
because it's really not about if, it's about when. And if I can get myself in the headspace of like, this is a part of life, it doesn't mean that like I don't belong here, it doesn't mean that like I'm not good enough, it just means that this is just like a bump in the road, and I am not any less than because
right.
of this. And so it's almost like preventative, like psychological therapy in that sort of sense of like, I am going to fail someday. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I will someday, and I am going to be okay despite that.
Yeah. It's so funny you should say that because I remember thinking when I was in university, I had a roommate and she was brilliant. I mean, brilliant. She had a 4.15 average or something. It was insane. And so I'd be beating myself up over whatever I got on whatever exam. And then I'd remind myself, like, you can graduate medical school with a C. Like, I had to keep telling myself that, like, I'm not saving lives. Like, that's not my education. I'm going to school for theater and English. I'm not going to kill anybody. So,
Yep.
like, if I'm getting a C, it's okay. It's all right. It's not the end of the universe. Now, personally, I would freak out about it, but I had to keep reminding myself. So it's so funny you should say that because that was like my mantra when I got a grade I wasn't happy with when I was in university.
Yeah, yeah. I like to say, for I don't know if this will like legally get me in trouble. I don't think so, but you don't need a doctor who knows everything. You need a doctor that can think critically about all of the different things and like help you on your journey.
Yeah, be
Because
resourceful, right? I mean,
yes,
ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all any of us can really do. You
yeah,
can't know everything.
I know, unfortunately.
Right? I mean, I remember very distinctly that I was 27 years old when I realized I didn't know everything. I was blessed for a very long time being, I picked things up really quickly. I was just really good at the things I chose to do. I had a great group of friends. I had a wonderful support system. I finished university. I was like at the top of my game. The last year I was in university, the year behind me, all made t-shirts that said WWR do. What would Risha do? No joke.
Wow.
That was really humbling because I was like, what are you doing? Um, but the year
That who,
after
me?
that, like me? Are you sure? Um, the year after that, I moved home and I actually had a double pulmonary embolism and I was hospitalized and my whole world just like came to a standstill. And there was a lot of relearning, like who I am and what am I doing? And I'm stuck in bed. So how do I entertain myself? And so there was a lot that happened there psychologically. But when I was up and running again, I got to this place where I was like, okay, like I'm ready. I'm willing, I'm able. Let's do this. And I'm throwing myself into things. And it was like 2 or 3 years probably throwing myself into things 100% before I realized you don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. Sit down and listen. And I mean,
Life changing.
yeah, life changing. I was tenacious, I wanted to do things and be places, and I mean, truly it was a near death experience, right? And it just reawakens a lot of things in you. These are all the things I want to achieve. This is all the stuff I want to do, and to my own credit, because I'm super type A, I've done most of it at this point. I've got like 3 things left on my list, right? But I think what happens is we get into this headspace where it's like, go, 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 do, and we don't celebrate those wins along the way. And because we're highly capable, we don't need to. It's fine. It's the doing that we find the joy in.
Yeah.
But if we don't stop, you can't ever get that, rush of endorphins when you celebrate actually achieving something.
That, yeah, I've heard that before too, that something inherent in type A is that ability to delay gratification. And it sounds exactly what you're describing because you're like, oh, well, when I do this, then that, then I'll have made it. Or like in 10 years when I achieve that goal, like we don't need like the immediate gratification. All that, not to say that like perhaps it wouldn't be good for us.
Yeah, it'd be great for
But
us. Yeah.
yes, like I don't have to finish reading the whole chapter before I treat myself to like a walk around the block. I could just go if
I
I'm
could
not very
just go and have a
focused.
walk.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Like just give yourself permission.
Yeah,
And
100%.
And so that also it made me think of when you said, I can use people around me and I don't need to know everything and everybody has a skill set. So I was just on an internal medicine rotation because in first year of residency, you do a lot of off service. So off service for me is anything other than psychiatry. And so I was on internal med, and it's notorious the being on call overnight for just like bad things happening.
Right.
And as the off service R1, you're the first call. So it's very anxiety provoking. And I remember like putting in my group chat, my co-residents, I was like, guys, like what should I be reviewing? Like what do I need to know? Do I have to have like ACLS in my back pocket and just like all these things? And I'm super catastrophizing and trying to plan for like every little thing that might happen. And they're like, you're gonna be fine. Like, no, do not study. Like it's fine. And I was got myself so worked up, being like, well, if somebody codes in front of me, like I'm the person, I have to know what to do. I don't know what to do. This feels horrifying for everybody involved. And then on the first night that I was on call, so they didn't completely code, but this person who on handover was like, quote, like very stable, became not very stable.
Right.
And their pressure dropped pretty low and they spiked a fever and they were elderly. And so it was very precarious. And I immediately called the first thing I did was call the respiratory therapist, and she came up super quick and managed the oxygen. And then, I have some skills. I was like, okay, we're going to do blood cultures. We're going to do chest x-ray. We're going to empirically start this antibiotic in case he's septic. And then I called the senior because I'm like, okay, I'm not alone. Like there is a senior resident downstairs doing something else. So I'm going to call them. So I ran the story past him. I was like, hi, this is the story. This is what happened. This is what I think we should do. Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything else I should add? And he kind of gave me a few other things to add on. He said, give me a call if like things get worse or you're worried. And then because he's old and has all these medical problems, I had to do a specific dosing for the antibiotic. And like, of course, my first thought is like, oh God, I'm gonna like kill him trying to save him. But I'm like, but there's a pharmacist on call. So I
There's a
called the
pharmacist.
pharmacist. And I was like, hi, I'm just wondering if you could help me. And the moral of the story is that I went into the night thinking that like I needed to know everything to save everyone. And that was not true at all. I just needed to accept what I didn't know
Yeah.
and
Ask for
not
help.
like exactly. And all the people are there to help you. You
Oh,
just have to
100%. Yeah.
have the ego check to be like, this is beyond me
Yeah.
and I
This
need
is a
help.
team. It's always a team effort, right?
Yeah. And that was like really eye-opening. And then I felt so much better for all of the rest of my call shifts. I was like,
Sure.
if something happens, I have all these people.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna work together.
Yeah.
It was
Senior
just like,
nurses who have been there forever, who know what's
oh
up,
yeah.
right? Like they're
They'll
my
like ask me
favorite.
they're like, oh, can I do this for this person? And I'm like, is that what you would usually do for them? And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, yes, okay.
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
know what they're doing.
Yeah. A
And
100%.
yeah, I think that's one of the special things about residency is having all the experienced professionals around you kind of like watch you kind of grow up and kind of come into your own and into your confidence, and everybody gives you a little piece of themselves along the way.
Yeah, it's so
Um,
cool. And isn't that true of anything, right? Like as you move along, those mentors and leaders that you meet that really have that impression, you take little pieces of what you learned from them along the way, and it fuels what you're now passing along to the next generation, right? It's
yeah.
pretty cool. So how did you come to psychiatry?
So I came by it super honestly. I mean, some people come into medicine day one, they're like, I am going to be an orthopedic surgeon. And that's what they do. And they do it and they don't waver. And I don't even know if I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I was like, I like kids, I like sports, maybe I'll do sports med, maybe I'll do peds. And then kind of as I went through med school, I don't know, I liked everything. And I said, okay, so I like a lot of things, but this is not like liking something is not enough to sustain my joy for the rest of my life. And so I got like quite intentional about it. I think in my second year, kind of because first and second year are very much classroom based, and third and
Yep.
fourth year are very clinical. And so as I'm about to enter the clinical world, I'm thinking a lot harder about, well, how am I really going to figure out like what to do with the rest of my life? And so and we talked about this a little bit before, but so much of the messaging we receive is that I need to look externally to figure that out.
Yeah.
Um, and what do you think I should do? And I've been thinking this. What do you think? And we're seeking like we're data gathering,
Validation.
validation, exactly, like seeking all the reassurance that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm impressing the right people. And what we really need to be doing is the opposite, is getting like very introspective, getting very intentional with, but for me, I was reading a book. I told you this as well. It's called The Confidence Gap, because I'm somebody who, throughout like university, I played sports, and I had a lot of performance anxiety to the point that it was like quite debilitating. It took a lot of the joy out of it for me in the end. And I was really worked up that that was going to happen in medicine because essentially, like, you are being evaluated, you
Right.
are being watched, you are expected to perform every day. Um, so I was kind of trying to get out ahead of it. And one of the things they talk about is, figure out what your values are. And, it's not so much like, what am I doing today? It's how am I showing up today?
Yeah.
And so getting intentional with like, how do I want to move through the world? And so I like sat down. It felt like a little bit dramatic and silly, but it was life changing. And then my value list came out like as what number one was authenticity, number two is compassion, and number three was like physical and mental health, and number four was meaningful like relationships.
Yep.
And so in my third year, like that's when you rotate around all the different specialties. And I tried like every day. Well, I taped the sticky note with like the list of my values. I taped it
Yeah, you
on
did.
the
That's
wall.
awesome.
I did
That's
above
what
my
I tell
desk.
all my clients to do. You did the thing.
I did the thing. It wasn't even a hard thing. I just did it was just a
Right?
thing. You
It's
just have to
not a
do
hard
it.
thing. So if any of my clients
No.
are listening, it's not a hard thing. Tape it up, put it in front of your face.
Yeah, and then every day I come home and well, I tried to like do a little reflection at the end of every day that lasted like 2 weeks and then I got very tired. But I did every day and I kind of checked in mentally and I said like, how am I feeling today? Am I feeling happy today? Did I get like a level of sleep that makes me feel okay? Did I have time to exercise today? On this rotation, do I feel like I have time to see my family?
Yeah.
And like, yes, the work, like, yes, like, was I intellectually stimulated? Did I go home and I had to read about it because I just had this drive to figure out what was going on because I was so fascinated. So there was those two components. It was like, do I like the work? And then it was, do I like my life outside of work? Because work is a huge part of life, but it's not the only
Because
part
it's
of
not the
life.
only part. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, psychiatry just was the perfect fit because especially with like the number one value for me being authenticity, like psychiatry demands like that you show up authentically,
Yeah.
that you are vulnerable, that you are present, that you are engaged. And if you are not, like it's just
Yeah.
not,
I think
I
that's
can't help
actually
you.
why you and I connected so much because that's my top value too. So authenticity is so important to me. And it's funny, I have this conversation with a lot of people, but I had a revelation probably about 4 years ago. Like I knew my values, but I couldn't figure out. I'd go to networking groups or whatever, meet new people, and there'd be someone where I was like, "Ooh, I can't do it." And they're like, "What? Oh no, I love that person." And I'm like, "Really? Okay." And I'm totally like, "You can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all." So I just keep my mouth shut, go home. But I kept like I don't care if everyone likes me. That makes no difference to me. But I always question when I don't like someone else that everyone else likes. I have a
Yeah.
moment like, okay, is that my stuff? Like, am I jealous? Is there, right? Like, is this something I need to parse for myself? And recently I've come to the realization that there's a handful of people that I think they're just not authentic, right? They
Yeah.
just come with their masks on and I can't get in past the mask. And so it's a huge red flag for me. So it immediately puts me in a defensive space and it makes me feel uncomfortable. And I couldn't understand it. This is like years. I was like, where's this coming from? And then when it clicked for me, I was like, oh my God, of course. Like my top value is not their top value.
Yeah.
Like it
And
it
it
doesn't
shapes your
rank.
world.
Yeah. It shapes the world. And so then you start to realize like I don't have to be friends with everyone. And I forget who told me, it might have been an old mentor of mine, said, it's like yin and yang, right? For every dark, there's a light. For every light, there's a dark. So if we take that into perspective, 50% of the people on this planet are not going to like you.
Oh.
And I was like, whoa, that's so many people.
You're like, oh
Right?
God.
And you likely won't like 50% of the people you meet. And I was like, whoa, okay. That just changes the whole frame.
Yeah. And I think like there's so many of us who we could fit in anywhere, you
Yeah,
know? Like you put me in any room, I can shapeshift to fit in, like no problem.
totally. My
But
empathy is
that's
so high.
exhausting.
My empathy is so high that I meet people and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll be on your level. You're down here, I'll be down here. You're up here, I'll be up here. It just immediately.
Yeah. It's like reflexive.
Yeah,
But no, it is exhausting and you don't realize it until you are somewhere that you belong. Like, and the
yeah,
difference between like fitting in and belonging is like when I fit in, like as I just said, I can fit in anywhere. I'm shape shifting. When I belong, I can just show up authentically, and that
yeah,
feels right. And that honestly, like looping this is like a really like big circle all the way back to how did I pick psychiatry, but that's really what it is that I just feel like I can show up like as I am, and that is part of what makes me great at what I do.
yeah,
um, and it's protective in terms of burnout and exhaustion and all that sorts of stuff because I don't feel like I go to work and I have to like turn myself on like okay like now I'm gonna be work Lauren like no I'm just me.
yeah.
And like yes there are certain things I have to turn off and compartmentalize it at the end of the day, but I don't have to turn on and off the way that I show up in the world.
Right. Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that's kind of what you want, right? Like for
Yeah.
everyone. That's you want to be able to show up 100% as you. You want the people who surround you to be inviting, you want to feel comfortable just being you. And I think it's certainly something a lot of people struggle with when they haven't taken the time to get to know themselves.
I was gonna say yeah because you have to actually know who you are to do that.
And that's a process. I think people take it for granted, like, oh, I'm going to go away to college and I'll find myself. Like, no, that's not exactly how it works. If you go away to college and you basically fit in, like you just said, right? Then you haven't learned anything,
Hmm.
right? There's still so much for you to learn about yourself. And I think that values piece, that's integral. How do you go forward if you don't know what you're about? Where are you going?
You're just bumbling. You're
Like,
like a
what
piece
is
of
the
seaweed floating in the ocean.
I don't want to, I have a friend who's really big on what does she call it? Oh, I'll remember it. But anyways, it's essentially that like progressing without direction because you just find things and on happenstance have these amazing experiences. And I was like, sure, okay, yeah, I get it. But how long is that fun for? I mean, for
Hmm.
me, It's not. For me, it's not, right? Like I have to have a
Yeah.
really solid idea. I don't need to know, um, I mean, I like to have goals. I'm I'm a
What?
I'm a goal-oriented person, but more than anything, when I sit down and I look at my top values, that's how I make my decisions more than anything,
Yeah,
right? So
I
not
agree.
having that, I would feel lost.
And I think too, there's a big difference between being flexible and being without direction.
Yeah.
So, like for me, like this is a very salient example. Like I can remember sitting in the lecture hall in medical school, like exams are coming up, and like the row in front of me, they're a little bit lower, and like they all have their calendars up, and every minute of their day is like from this time to this time, I'm gonna walk a dog, and then I'm gonna meal prep, and then I'm gonna go to class, and then I'm gonna go to the gym, and then I'm gonna study. And I was like, am I supposed to be doing this? Like, and it was that was when I was like, oh my, am I not type A? Like, um, but
I
I
have
and
lived
people.
that life. I have lived that life, Lauren. I tell you, I used to work for a company where I would show up at 7 a.m. I would leave at 5. I was there from 7 to 5. My entire day was booked across the calendar. I had to schedule pee breaks.
Oh no.
That's how busy it was. And then I'd leave there and go and run a theater company in the evening. So basically another full-time job.
Oh
And
gosh.
that was my life. It was overscheduled to the point where I couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
And what would
And
happen is the downtime, the time I actually got alone, was never restorative. It was escapism.
hmm,
I'd be like, don't talk to me, don't look at me. I wasn't me in that time at all. I never felt like me. I was checking out. I was watching hours upon hours of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was just somewhere
things were dark.
else. Like I just needed to be in another universe that wasn't this universe because I'd scheduled myself to death.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I'm all for like a bit of scheduling, but
Sure, structure's important, right? Like, and I think
structure,
we've
yes.
come up with some really brilliant things when we've put some boundaries in place. And boundaries, have you read Nedra Tawwab's Set Boundaries, Find Peace?
I have not.
It is so wonderful.
It
And
sounds delightful.
oh my gosh, you just completely love her.
You
I'm
have
a,
to, can you send that to me after?
yeah, I absolutely will.
Okay.
Um, I'm a massive fan anyway. So Nedra's book is one of our recommended reading pieces for my super type A attempt at being Zen, the program. And in it, she talks about setting boundaries and how they're important and how they put you in a place where you have control, but also allow for that flexibility if that's what you need, right?
Mhm.
It's just so brilliant. And it gives you a little bit of insight too into the kind of things that maybe you're doing as a super type A person because you think you get control.
Oh, that's one of my favorite quotes. I literally just sent it to somebody this morning. It was a quote. It was actually from Liz Gilbert. And you are afraid of surrender because you don't want to lose control, but you never had control. All you had was anxiety. And when I read that,
100%.
I was like, oh my God, I feel attacked. It's like I don't have any control, and that's so much of it as being type A and like wanting to control everything and
Yeah.
wanting it all to be perfect is leaning into that like self-compassion piece and saying I cannot control everything and accepting that and learning how to sit with uncertainty,
Yeah.
knowing that things will probably be fine. Like they might not
Yeah.
be perfect, but I bet they're probably going to be fine.
You know, um, this week I had, those Facebook memories?
Oh
They like
yes,
pop
yeah.
up and it's like 8 years ago, right?
You're like, I did not need to see that.
So this week it said like 8 years ago or something like that. And it was a post from me that I put up and it said, Life is not meant to be efficient, period. Repeat. Life is not meant to be efficient. Repeat. And it was funny because it came up for me on one of those days where I was honestly like astronomical stress. I had one work day last week. One. Kids sent home sick, PA days, like just one thing after another. And, you know, it's like you're trying to get up and you keep getting knocked down. You try to get up and you keep getting knocked down. And you feel sometimes like really alone in that feeling too, where you're like, no one sees it. No one understands. No one gets it. I don't have the help. I don't have the support. I don't have what I need. I'm freaking out, right? So I had basically an entire week like that last week. And of course, this memory comes up on the weekend, and I'm like, okay, yes, I understand, Risha. Thank you. So it was one of those like, thank you, past Risha, for at least having a moment of wisdom that you decided to share on social media so that future Risha could come back to it and be like, right, gosh, sometimes I'm smart. That was great.
I am good.
That was really good. I got to remember that. But yeah, it's so funny. Like we get ourselves worked up into this, you know, overwhelming, stressy space, and we know the tools. Like we know
Yeah.
the work we've done. It's not like it's new information, but sometimes you just need to be reminded,
Yeah.
right? So
And
actually that brings us to the next question. So you and I, when we were talking, you were talking about completing the stress cycle. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, how do you end when you're spiraling and freaking out and you're just like,
me,
I
what?
mean, for me, I'm a puddle of tears and that's how I end it. But like, how do you,
No, that is one of the strategies. It is. Um, so I mean, I guess like first, just do you think like your listeners would be familiar with what is like the stress cycle and these sorts of
no,
things? Like,
I think they'd probably want to know, like, what is the
okay,
stress cycle?
okay, so this is perfect. I love evolutionary psychology, and I will do the Sparks Notes version, but essentially, it's like in the cave age, the stressors in life were like, oh, like I have no food, like I'm gonna starve, or like this bear is chasing me and I'm like it's gonna get me. And the kind of the analogy is like back then, like when there was a stressor, it was very clear when the stressor ended. Like the bear was chasing you and then like you escaped or whatever and you found safety. And
Right.
then that stressor was over and your body, which had been like really revved up, gets to have that moment of
Ah, yeah,
it's over. It's over. Now, though, our lives are full of these stressors that are much more covert. The like the work stress and the family stress and the relationship stress. And not that it's like all bad necessarily, but our bodies just it's not obvious. It's not like, oh, now like now this really big exam is over and like now I can just breathe. Like
right.
your body doesn't just know that intuitively. And so you have to it's like you have to get your mind caught up like through your body. And there's lots of ways to do it. And for me, it's usually exercise. And like I'm not really a runner, but like if it's not a beautiful day, if it's not like a Sunday morning, and if it's like a dark like evening on like winter and I'm running, like you better check in on me because like something's going on. I'm trying to complete a cycle of some sort, but it's just kind of like getting out of your head back into your body, and then like after that, the parasympathetic system comes back online, and you're like, ah, like it's over.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, if you don't physically have that completion of the stress cycle, you just stay in this perpetual
You
state of
run.
stress, which is
Yeah.
just taxing on the body.
And frankly, I mean, it's so easy to be in that space, right?
I
Because
know.
right now it's like you watch the news, you're stressed out, you're trying to get your kids out the door for school, you're stressed out, you're trying to get your day organized, you're stressed out, someone says something that upsets you. And I'm really good at not doing this now, but I do know a lot of my clients do this, where it's like, I said this thing, did they take it wrong? And they story tell into like oblivion, where they're telling themselves, and I'm like, no, 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 like, stop. You're creating the stress. Like, don't create it if it's not in existence. We don't
Yep.
need to add, because it's coming, like, information comes from every angle, and the radio's on, and social media, and it's just never ending, right? That's part one of Lauren Miller's interview. Please join me for part two, where Lauren shares even more insight into her super type A attempt at being Zen. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to our channel wherever you listen to podcasts. Visit www.yorkmotivational.com for more information on my super type A attempt at being Zen, the coaching program, Lead Without Permission, or visit our contact page to reach out to Risha. Wishing you all continued balance and fulfillment on your road to Zen.